Okay, so welcome to the webinar. This is the webinar all about the integration between Donorfy and Mailchimp. And my name is Robin. I'm the founder and product manager here at Donorfy, and I'm going to take you through what the integration does. Just in terms of an agenda, we're going to look at right from the top, really. This isn't a Mailchimp training course as such, but in case you didn't know the bits that are relevant to Donorfy and Mailchimp and how they work together, we'll just sort of recap on that very briefly at the top. And then we'll look at a typical scenario, how Mailchimp and Donorfy are meant to coexist in this integration, what they actually do and send to one another. Then we'll walk through some of the main concepts behind the integration, so just to help people understand exactly what it does. And we'll get started. We'll show you the sort of getting started steps in setting it up. Then we'll look at how Mailchimp sends information to Donorfy, and vice versa. We'll look at how Donorfy sends information to Mailchimp. We've got a list of FAQs and things you should really know about how the integration works, because obviously with our support service, we do hear one or two of the things that people have challenges with. So we'll try and iron out some of those things in this session as well. And then we'll look at one or two more kind of advanced things you can do with it, like initiating supporter journey emails, automated campaigns as they're called in Mailchimp, and then how to sort of link your Donorfy and Mailchimp campaigns together so you can see a bit more about them inside of Donorfy. I think it's probably fair to say on the call, we're going to have people who haven't yet tried this and want to find out what it does for the first time. And we'll have people who are perhaps much more experienced on it. So we'll try and make sure that everyone gets something from this particular webinar. You go away with some useful information. One of the things just to highlight is that, as you know, Donorfy has the Essentials product, which is the free version of Donorfy, and there's the professional one. And this feature is actually available in both of those. So you don't have to be on the paid for version of Donorfy to use this feature. And of course, Mailchimp itself also has a sort of similar freemium model where you can use Mailchimp up to a point for nothing. And again, that will still work with Donorfy. So this isn't kind of just restricted to people who pay for one or the other or both of those things. Okay, so we're going to quickly look then at the overview of what Mailchimp does for you and how especially the bits within that relate to Donorfy. So starting right at the top, it's an email service provider, Mailchimp. They're known as ESPs. There are other ones out there, people like Digital, people like Constant Contact. Mailchimp is by far the most popular, and many people in the charity sector use it for obvious reasons. It's a nice product, easy to use, and that's what they do. So it's there for you to do your email marketing campaigns. Mailchimp has within it contacts. Now, sometimes they're called subscribers, sometimes they're called members, but essentially we're going to call them contacts in here in this presentation. And they are the people who subscribe to or unsubscribe from a list. Now, Mailchimp has recently changed the word list to audience, so we'll be adopting the word audience in this as well, but it's a bit of a terminology crunch occasionally with some of the things they do and how they do them and how frequently they change them, but we'll call them contacts in audiences today. Within your audiences, you can have these things called tags. So you're familiar with tags in Donorfy, the way that you can categorize and segment your list in Donorfy, your constituents. There's an exact match for that kind of functionality in Mailchimp. They have tags as well, which is a feature they introduced maybe a year ago now. So your contacts can be tagged, and your contacts can't see how they're tagged. So tags are just visible to you, as it were, as an operator of Mailchimp, only you know that a contact is tagged with a tag meaning they're a high value donor or regular giver or whatever it is. Similar but different is the concept of groups in Mailchimp. So you can have tags and groups defined in your audience, and groups are a more nuanced kind of way of categorizing your supporters or your contacts in Mailchimp. So contacts can be in groups, and those groups can have different values than just in or out. You can have a much more nuanced level of information in there, which we'll look at in a moment. But just to know that groups are there, and contacts can join and leave groups and sort of change their membership of a group on forms. So you'll be familiar with the fact that Mailchimp offers forms. Forms can be embedded in your website, can be popped up on your website in order to encourage people to subscribe. And on those forms, they can manage their groups. I've got some examples which we'll show in a moment. Mailchimp has the notion of campaigns, which is essentially an email blast that you send out. That is a campaign. So they're traditional kind of bulk email campaigns, but they have other campaigns as well, which are relevant to the integration. And they are what they call automated campaigns or automations, which are much more like one at a time type of things, where you initiate an automation for one person to receive an email today, and then maybe 7 days later, there's a follow-up email with a different message. Maybe a month later, a follow-up on there. So it's automations. Some people call them supporter journeys. Yeah, they are supported in Mailchimp as a feature. So they're the kind of features that you need to be aware of in Mailchimp. And I suggest if you haven't really got to grips with Mailchimp yet, then look at their videos, look at their help site, and it'll take you through those features. So you would need to be familiar with them in order to make this integration work. So now we're going to look at how Mailchimp sits alongside Donorfy in a typical charity situation. So it all starts in the cloud with your website. And let's say that on your website, you have got a form which you've defined in Mailchimp. And that form is the form that's inviting people to subscribe or sign up to one of your audiences, now previously known as lists. And you can control what that form looks like and what it prompts for. So you may not be able to see on this particular one, but you've got email address, first name, last name, and then you've got 3 groups on there. And those groups are things like opting in to things like the fundraising emails, events emails, and volunteering emails in this case. So they kind of have an equivalent in Donorfy that we'll look at later on, which is the purposes in Donorfy. Anyway, by someone visiting your site on whichever device they have to hand at that time, they can subscribe to your audience, and that will populate your Mailchimp audience with a new person. We haven't seen this in Donorfy yet, though. So what happens is when your integration is set up in Mailchimp, Mailchimp will push that information immediately into Donorfy. So using the email address and the information that was submitted on the form, it will create or update an existing constituent, if it already has them in there by that email address, in your Donorfy system, and that's an immediate process. Or there's a delay maybe of 30 seconds while that happens. Okay, so you've now got the situation where someone's subscribed, they're in your Mailchimp, they're in your Donorfy. Within your Donorfy, though, something else might happen to that constituent. They might make a donation. They might become a volunteer and have some activities on their timeline that indicate other kinds of engagement with you. So let's imagine they make a gift, and in doing so, that's going to use the tagging feature of Donorfy. So if you have auto tags set up, it might classify this person with a tag as being low value donor, medium value donor, high value, whatever the rules you've set up in your Donorfy to create that tag. So we've got the situation then where we know something about that person in Donorfy, that Mailchimp doesn't yet know. So it doesn't know that that person's a donor or not. So the integration in the other direction from Donorfy to Mailchimp will kind of enrich the data that you've already got about somebody in Mailchimp. Now, it might be that you've got people in Donorfy that have joined your Donorfy through another route, perhaps a Just Giving supporter, or perhaps an Eventbrite attendee booking an event. So you'd have a constituent in Donorfy that Mailchimp knows nothing about at all, not even that they're a subscriber. So when you push information from your Donorfy across to your Mailchimp, it will not only enrich the ones it knows about with the tags and so on that you've given it in Donorfy, but it will also send across any new supporters that have given permission, crucially, through Eventbrite or through the Just Giving connection or whatever other connections you're using in Donorfy, push them through as new contacts, subscribing to an audience in Mailchimp. And of course, when you have your information in Mailchimp, you've got your subscribers, the people who are in your audience, the contacts who have subscribed. You can then do things with that in Mailchimp. You can send out a campaign. So a campaign is going to be a bulk email out to many people, and you can use the information that has come from Donorfy, such as the fact that they're a regular giver, to segment your list, because you might not want to send out to your entire list. You might just want to send something out to your regular givers. So the way that Mailchimp wants that to work is they want you to have one audience with many tags describing people in that audience. Time was that Mailchimp used to encourage you to have multiple lists, maybe a regular givers list or a cash donors list or a volunteers list. But you'd get the situation where you have the same email on 2, 3, 4 of those lists, and you'd pay for that 2, 3, 4 times. So they've kind of consolidated that now, and the advice is you have one audience with tags so that you can segment your mailings and send it out to a target audience. But also within a mailing, you might have some conditional text or conditional sections in the email you're sending out, dependent upon what you know about them in their tags and groups. So for example, you might have an email that goes out with a bit of conditional text in it that says, why not sign up for gift aid? Because we know from the Donorfy situation that we've pushed over to Mailchimp that that person doesn't yet have a gift aid. Okay, so you can send out much more informed information when it's connected to your CRM, connected to Donorfy. So hopefully that was clear. We're now going to start looking at how this is all built and how this hooks together between Donorfy and Mailchimp. So as you know, we've just described the main purpose of the integration is that you can populate your Donorfy from Mailchimp when people sign up, and maybe even update their information on a Mailchimp form, and vice versa, populate Mailchimp from people who come into Donorfy or are updated in Donorfy. So it's a way of populating either system. It's not a synchronization in the sense that those people are not forever connected together, but it does help you create content in each system, create contacts and constituents that you know has come from the other system and is up to date. So it enriches your Mailchimp contact data, which we've just described, by using tags from Donorfy, so you can use them in your Mailchimp campaigns. For example, the regular giving campaign that we looked at just now, send a campaign out just to the segment that you call regular givers, which is based on a tag that comes from Donorfy. And the other example, conditional content, you can put a bit of a command in your Mailchimp email template or copy that says, if this contact is potentially a gift aider but aren't a gift aider yet, then put some content in your email to invite them to make a gift aid declaration. And then perhaps into the more advanced concepts, the possibility of initiating automations from things that happen in Donorfy. So let's say a new regular gift comes in via one of our Donorfy giving widgets in your website, that can immediately kick off one of those automated campaigns in Mailchimp. and then seeing your Mailchimp campaign information inside Donorfy as well. So that's the rationale. That's the sort of feature list, as it were, for the integration. That's what it does. So let's look at these systems side by side. I'm not expecting you to necessarily read all the information on that page. It's probably a bit small for you. But this is to illustrate that we have two different systems side by side. We have Mailchimp with the way that it structures its contact information, and we have Donorfy with the way that we structure our constituent information. And somehow, with an integration like this, the integration needs to understand which bits go where. So when we push information from Donorfy to Mailchimp, which tag goes to which tag in Mailchimp, or the other way around, which group informs which purpose in Donorfy. So there is a mapping process that you're going to need to do when you set up your Mailchimp integration that says this tag goes to that tag, or this group setting goes to this purpose in your comms preferences area in Donorfy. So you can imagine that you've got to really think through how the structure of the list needs to mirror broadly your constituent structure in Donorfy. You won't need everything in Mailchimp that you've got in Donorfy, and maybe vice versa. But you will need to understand how you're going to want to segment your data in Mailchimp to send targeted emails out to the right people, and what kind of attributes, like whether they have gift aid or not, sit inside that contact record so that you can customize the message even further. So that's really, I think, a principal concept to understand, is that we have mappings between the two that inform what goes where in both directions. The mappings work both ways. So let's look at how you then set all this up. And as I just mentioned, the first thing is to make sure that your Mailchimp audience is set up and ready to go, that you have your tags and your groups defined. So you may already have an audience with lots of subscribers in. You may be starting from scratch. You may need to combine multiple audiences into one to take advantage of this segmentation capability, rather than work with multiple lists or audiences. So some preparatory work to do there. There is some help on the Donorfy knowledge base about how to, what to bear in mind when you are setting up an audience and potentially merging other audiences into one master audience. So that's there to be read and considered as you do that. But let's get your Mailchimp audience set up first, and then we'll go through the Donorfy steps. We'll go through them all in detail, but just to summarize those Donorfy steps, there's really three things you need to do. First of all, you have a Mailchimp API key in your Mailchimp system. You have to find that in your account settings and copy and paste that into your Donorfy Mailchimp settings. What does that enable? Well, that enables the Donorfy to Mailchimp direction. So that enables information to find the right Mailchimp system and populate it with information that comes from Donorfy, whether that's enriching existing contacts or adding new contacts. Second thing you need to do is to do the mapping. So map those tags and purposes, those lines, as it were, that go between the two systems that I showed you just now, and make sure that they go to the right places between the two systems. That's why it's important to have set them up first in Mailchimp. And thirdly, you need to set up something in Mailchimp called a webhook. And a webhook is a slightly techie term for really a kind of a trigger that happens. So when somebody adds themselves, via the form on your website, they subscribe to your audience, the webhook will reach out to Donorfy and say, got a new contact here for you, let's add it as a constituent into your Donorfy system. And then Donorfy takes over, picks it up, works out whether it's got them or not already, and does the appropriate treatment in Donorfy. So the webhook is the thing that enables the Mailchimp to Donorfy sync. So let's go back to the start of that list about setting up your Mailchimp audience and your tags. Now, I happen to have open on my other tabs here my sort of Mailchimp system for my demo charity called A Great Cause. And I've also got my Donorfy system for A Great Cause. So we're going to dive into that now and switch between the slides and real live information. So we can see that we've defined some tags in our Mailchimp system that broadly mirror the kind of tags we might have about people in Donorfy. If I go now into this other tab, going into the audience, they're not big audiences, as you can see. I've got two of them. My sample one that I use for messing around on, and my mailing list for this charity called A Great Cause. The grand sum of 8 people on board. So if I go into that mailing list and I go into Manage Contacts and select Tags, this is where that screenshot on that slide came from. So these are the tags. I can create a new tag here. So I might have come up with a new tag in Donorfy that I want to have in Mailchimp because I want to do segmentation based on it, something like that. So you can easily create them there. And top tip would be to give them the same name in Mailchimp as they have in your Donorfy system, because it makes the mapping an awful lot easier if they're called the same thing. Remember, the contact themselves, the subscriber, won't be able to see these things. So obviously, if GDPR, subject access request and all that, they will be able to if they ask for that, but it's not information that will present itself on a form. Okay, so let's just go back to the slide. So set up your tags. Tags, remember, can only be on or off settings. If you want something a bit more nuanced, like gift aid, which we'll look at in a moment, we need to use a group. So what are groups? Groups are similar to tags, but you can put more kind of variables in there. So groups here include a group called I want to receive ... and then a choice of checkboxes on the form. I want to receive fundraising emails, events emails, and volunteering emails. If I go to my form, I've got a form I'm displaying here. Here it is. So here's the Mailchimp form from that audience, where I am asking for the usual information, email first and last, and then some tick boxes here that actually are the groups we've defined on this list. So emails I want to receive, fundraising, events, and volunteering. So they can appear on sign-up forms if they're groups. Remember, a tag can't appear on a sign-up form, so you can't put a tag on there unless Mailchimp have changed it recently. You can't put a tag on there to let people self-service themselves into or out of a tag. It has to be a group. And these are best mapped because of the kind of nature of them. These are tick boxes saying I want to receive these kinds of emails. In this case, these are best mapped to purposes in Donorfy. So remember your consents, your preference center in Donorfy, where you've got purposes, then use it for that. You can also use groups to include conditional content in an email in Mailchimp. We'll look at the gift aid example I mentioned earlier in just a moment. So let's just hop back across to the mailing list. Manage contacts. We were in tags, we're now in groups. So these are the groups I have set up. Emails I want to receive, which I can then view the groups within it. And then I've got a gift aid one, which is hidden from the form. We don't want people just to, well, you might want to, I don't know, to tick a box to say, yes, I'm gift aiding. But the gift aid group is a hidden group on the form that shows whether they are a current gift aider, a potential gift aider, or have declined. Okay, so that information is coming across from a tag in Donorfy to a gift aid group. So let's now look at setting up the Donorfy part of the settings. So in your account settings here in Mailchimp, you have an area called, I'll just click into it, account. It's hidden away somewhat, but I'm just going to go to it now. Extras, API keys. Now you can see I've had a few of these in the past, but there's only one that's active. You can generate one, and it just generates this long sort of string of, looks pretty random, doesn't it? Long string of information. that is there. And what you need to do is you need to copy that and go into your Donorfy. So if I go into my Donorfy system here, go to configuration, go to Mailchimp settings, and API settings, and paste it into there and save changes. And you can test them to make sure it can reach the Mailchimp that you have just connected to. All right, so that's all there is to it. That's setting up the ability then for you to populate, remember, Mailchimp from Donorfy. Then that's what you do. You paste it in there. That's just a screenshot confirming what we've done. Next step, how to map this information between the two systems. So this is the lines between the two systems. So let's go back to Donorfy. In your Mailchimp settings, for the audience that we're talking about, the A Great Cause mailing list, which has been pulled from your Mailchimp because it knows where your Mailchimp is now because we've done the API bit. If I open that up, it's going to show me all of those lines that we drew, if you like, between the two systems. I think, yeah, here it comes. Okay, so I've got 10 mappings, and you can see I've got a purpose. Events emails is being mapped. Let's open it up. Events emails in Donorfy is mapped to events emails group here in Mailchimp. Tags. Donor low value tag in Donorfy is mapped to donor low value tag in Mailchimp. But by having these mappings, even though it sounds obvious because they're the same name, you need to declare all these mappings because it uses these mappings when it pushes data and forth between the two systems. Okay. Then lastly, the webhook, the thing that enables the sending of contacts that get added through forms or whatever purpose, whatever method into your Mailchimp gets added into your Donorfy. So what you have to do is go into your audience settings again. Go there, sorry, looking around. So we're going to go back to our audience settings. And it's in settings there, and it's called webhooks. And you basically have to add a webhook, create a new webhook. What does a webhook look like? Well, it's got your, you have a sort of fairly more random than this, a fairly, I think it's a 10-character API key in your Donorfy system. So it's your Donorfy unique number. And you put that in there alongside this rest of this URL. And then you leave everything as it is and click update, and it creates you a webhook. That simply means that the information from Mailchimp will then go to Donorfy automatically as a result of that process. All right, so you've done step 3 of 3 in setting things up. So what happens is when you register, or someone registers for your emails, they'll get added as a constituent into Donorfy. Let's quickly do that. I'm just going to say, I'm going to put myself on this mailing list. I've already done it a few times. So I'm using an email alias, which you can do with our email system, which is called demo1 at donorfy.com. I'm subscribing with this email address, and I'm going to give myself a random surname. I'm opting into fundraising and volunteering and subscribing. No, I'm not a robot. Subscribe. And on my other screen, I'm opening up my email to find the kind of the double opt-in, which I've got. So I'm just clicking on the yes, subscribe me to this list, which it's now doing. And we should find out that within our audience, we've now got 9 subscribers, including the one I just added, Robin Fisk plus Demo1, opted into fundraising and volunteering. And after a short satellite delay, I should find Robin Williams has been added to my Donorfy automatically. There he is. And he's opted into fundraising and volunteering emails. Okay, so that's the kind of automated process of adding it that way. And obviously it knew which purposes because of the mapping that we'd set up. It knew how to translate what was in the group to the purposes in Donorfy. And then how stuff goes the other way. So this isn't automated. This is on demand. Lots of reasons why that is, and go into this later if you like. But you have to then round up information from Donorfy that you want to push across back to your Mailchimp. Now, the way that we would do that would be to, let's go back to my constituent. Let's say we have something to send back to Mailchimp. Maybe this guy's made a donation, so therefore our auto tagging will kick in and call him a low, medium, or high value donor, and maybe something else, I don't know. So let's say he is a medium value donor. I'm just short circuiting the process here by manually adding that tag. I'm not going to go through adding a donation on and waiting overnight. And we'll also say that he's also opting into events emails. So we now have an updated situation there for this constituent, and we want to send it back to Mailchimp. So from time to time, you're going to need to go to your lists, which is the mechanism we use for sending this stuff to Mailchimp. So I'm just opening up my lists on a separate tab. I've got a list already that I've designed in order to send things to Mailchimp. Click on my Mailchimp sync list, which is I'm going to push my individual constituent with email addresses over to Mailchimp and update all of those tags as and when it needs it. So I've got 4 people on my database here that all have information that we want to send across. And I do that by clicking on the Mailchimp icon at the top of the list result. So do this sort of mini monkey at the top there. It's saying, where do we want to send it? Which audience? We've only got the one audience we're working with, so we'll send it there. And that's now queuing up a process to send that all across to Mailchimp. So let's just recap what it's doing. Get your list results up, click on the monkey, and it's eventually going to give us a report of what it's going to send across. So it's a confirmatory step in between doing what I just did and it appearing in Mailchimp. So we'll just go across to Mailchimp, Donorfy now, to my list, and we will see. I'm just going to refresh the screen, look for my Mailchimp list, and see if it's decided to provide the report. Yeah, here it is. So of the 4 people that were in my list, it's decided 2 of them aren't in Mailchimp. It's going to add them. So do I want that to happen? Yes or no? And 2 of them are existing in Mailchimp, but they'll be changed. Their Mailchimp information needs updating because perhaps we've got new tags or new purposes that it didn't have before. So I'm going to select both of those to happen. If I want to know who they are, I can download them here. I was going to go for it and update it. And what we will see in a moment is that now that that's being queued up and that's running in the background, that will now update our subscribers. So if I find the constituent we just added, Robin Williams, here's his information. Doesn't have any tags yet, so it hasn't finished yet, basically. But he does have some groups. Maybe if I refresh that, just quickly see if it's finished. No, it'll take a moment. I think it does groups and then tags and takes sometimes a few minutes to come through. But that will update it so that we can then use that information in the mailings that we do from Mailchimp for campaigns. Okay, so that will appear in Mailchimp as we've just seen. So couple of things related to this. What happens if in Donorfy you're sending information across to Mailchimp, but you actually have multiple emails? Well, it'll send one, and it'll send the first one it finds. So if it's found a preferred email, it'll send that. If it's found a personal email 1, personal email 2, and so on through the list, it will send that. So it'll only send the one over there. So when you do a campaign, let's see how we now make use of all that information. So I'm going to go back to my Mailchimp screen. Let's see if, there you go. Just refresh the screen. It's now been updated with a medium value tag, and his group information is probably also now including the fact that he can get different kinds of emails as well. So to look at the campaign and how that looks in Mailchimp, you can send a campaign to your entire list, or you can segment to a subset of the list, say just the medium value donors. Sorry, I'm clicking around there a little bit. So within Mailchimp, if I want to create a campaign, let's find new campaigns here. First thing it does when you create a campaign is say, who do you want to send it to? And begin the campaign. Who we're sending it to, add recipients, choose an audience. It's my great cause where there are now 10 people on that list. Is it all of them or to a segment? Now I can send to a segment based upon a tag. I'll just say all my medium value donors and so on. So you can then proceed with your campaign knowing it's limited to that segment in the database. You might also want to, mentioned earlier, use content from their record to conditionally put a paragraph in. Let's just show what that looks like. So if we go back to campaigns and show my newsletter campaign, edit the design. So hopefully you're familiar with all of this stuff here in Mailchimp, but this is the Mailchimp design. We've got some code in here saying if their current status is that they're a potential gift aider that came across from Donorfy into a group in Mailchimp. So we're now saying if that group is set to potential gift aid, you can drop some content in there. Have you thought about gift aid? Nice logo. Call our supporter services for more info, or it might be a URL off to a different place so they can opt into gift aid, and so on. So that will only appear if they're a potential gift aider. And then you've got the rest of your newsletter, topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, whatever the content of your newsletter is. So that's how you would then provide that information or use that information to vary the content in your campaign. Okay, so that's there on the slide. The slides we'll put onto the slides will be on the Donorfy chat group. So if you're in Donorfy chat, you'll be able to get the slides. And if you're not, I encourage you to join it because there's got a bit of debate in there and dialogue about using Donorfy and best practice. So that's the main purpose of the integration between Mailchimp and Donorfy. But there are one or two slightly more detailed things you can do with it. So let's have a look at this. Just a couple and then we'll finish up. First one is how you might link your campaign in Mailchimp to a Donorfy campaign. Why would you want to do it? Well, within Donorfy, you might want to provide somebody who is able to use campaigns in Donorfy, but not have a sign into Mailchimp. You might want to offer them the ability to see how that campaign is going. So here's a campaign in Donorfy, the newsletter March 2019. And on the analytics page, if you scroll to the bottom, you have the ability to say, which Mailchimp campaign does this match with? And choose the campaign. And in doing so, it then pulls through the kind of vital statistics about this particular campaign from Mailchimp. So it's not in Donorfy, but I'm pulling it through live, as it were, from Mailchimp, so you can see how many people opened it, what the open rate is, and all that kind of stuff. Okay, and as a byproduct of doing that as well, you can also see Mailchimp campaign history in people's timelines. So if I go and find the guy in my database who I know, some Mailchimp campaign history. What's happened there? Let me go. I must have inadvertently deleted him. Okay, well, I'll show you where it is, even if I can't show you it in detail. When you look on someone's timeline and you have Mailchimp history showing, as an option at the bottom there, it will include with a little yellow Mailchimp icon their Mailchimp mailing history as well. I'll show you what it looks like on a screenshot. So on someone's timeline, you'll get your Mailchimp campaign history on individuals or people's timelines as well. So that's kind of advanced topic or miscellaneous topic number one. Miscellaneous topic number two is about email automations. So you can initiate an email automation from within Donorfy. So what is the automation? Just to recap, it's what gets sent to a single person over a period of time. So it might be a one-off email. It might be the beginning of a sequence of emails. So we can see here in my automation builder, so I'm back in Mailchimp now, we can see that we've defined this particular campaign support journey to say, you know, if you've just made a donation to the Easter campaign, you're going to get this welcome email. And so you can edit that and design that email as normal. And then on day 2, a follow-up. Did you know whatever about the Easter campaign? And then day 7 and so on. You can make these as, you know, detailed and long as you like. How do they get initiated? So as far as Donorfy is concerned, they get initiated when a widget has been processed. So if someone comes along to your website, takes the option to go for, say, a one-off donation or a recurring donation, the widget can be told which of these automations to fire once someone has made a contribution through that widget. The way you set that up, go to settings and show you where that lives. And web widgets. So here are my Donorfy web widgets, opening up the top one. So this is basically website card payments via Stripe. So this is a widget that I'm using for the Easter campaign. And down here in an area called Supporter Journey Settings, we can say that when any donations are made using this through this widget, then include this person in an Easter campaign supporter journey, which is pulling this from Mailchimp. Okay, so it's a way for you to automate that kind of thing. We are working also, just for information, on other ways to automate these things from within Donorfy, but at the moment the widget is the only trigger that creates that. You can get more adventurous in doing that using something like Microsoft Flow, if you like, which is something that you would need to investigate separately. We'll have other videos about that. But out of the box, a widget will be able to start your automated campaigns. So that's it. Let's move on to the final steps. Just a few of the things that come from our support team about the kind of gotchas, perhaps, that people sometimes don't appreciate when using these things. So I'll just work through these, but these are all in an FAQs document on the knowledge base. So if you want a proper recap, then look there. So one common misconception is that once you've connected your two systems together, that it would automatically start the flow of data between them and populate Donorfy perhaps with all of your contact subscribers from your Mailchimp system. That's not the case. It only means that from that point forward, it will add people in. And if you want to do a sort of retrospective import into Donorfy of all your existing contacts in Mailchimp, you'll need to export them and import them using the file uploader. Okay. Misconception number 2, Mailchimp to Donorfy is automatic, but Donorfy to Mailchimp isn't. That's the, I think many people will assume it's automatic both ways. You do need to push data from Donorfy to Mailchimp, whereas the other way around, it is automated. Why is it that way? Well, most traffic goes from Mailchimp to Donorfy anyway, so it's not so such a big deal normally. But really, usability feedback from people when we did have an automated link was that there's so much automation going on that people weren't entirely sure or confident it was doing the right things all the time. So at least with the on-demand push of data, you're in control. You see how many it's going to add, how many it's going to update. You can preview it before you then press the button that actually does it. So that's why. When to use a Mailchimp tag versus a group, or a Donorfy tag versus a purpose. I think we covered that in the previous content. Essentially, tags are invisible. People can't self-serve themselves with tags, and groups can be a little bit more nuanced, and they naturally map to purposes in Donorfy. So tags to tags, groups to purposes would be a rule of thumb. Another one, if you have created additional fields in your Mailchimp, so let's say apart from email address, first name, last name, you're also prompting for a field that's shoe size or something, and it's a mandatory field, you've made it a required field, you won't be able to populate Mailchimp from Donorfy, because Donorfy can't provide that information. It doesn't know about that information. It's not available in the mapping. So it will prevent the integration from working. All right, so just bear that in mind when designing your Mailchimp audience fields and structure, that go for groups and tags, not custom fields. Another thing just to bear in mind, Donorfy only sends constituents when the mail channel is set to green, set to yes. A few more of these. Even when Donorfy says it's selected 10 constituents to send across the Mailchimp to add to your Mailchimp because it doesn't already have them, it might not result in all 10 being added, which can sound a bit confusing and misleading. So why do we say there's 10 in the first place? Well, Mailchimp have numerous sort of embedded policies about how they enable the API to add new contacts from an integration, and we don't always know about them at the time that we preview the list. So if you do get a failure, Donorfy now provides an email with full reasons in there, so that it's transparent about why only 8 out of the 10 got added. So there's nothing we can do about the preview. We don't actually know until we send the data that some will get rejected. One reason is that, let's say someone has deleted a contact in Mailchimp, you can't then just re-add the same email address in Mailchimp for a GDPR reason that Mailchimp prevent it for. So that's why that happens. So the only way you can re-add that person with that email address is to do it through the double opt-in through a form in the normal way. So what are we saying here? New records not being sent by the Mailchimp webhook. Yeah, so if your Mailchimp is being populated not by the standard Mailchimp forms, but by some custom forms that go through the Mailchimp API, or maybe direct from something else like an events management system that populates Mailchimp through its API, anything that's sourced from an API into Mailchimp cannot then be sent to Donorfy. So this is to prevent sort of perpetual loops that could happen if both systems were pinging each other saying, got a new record, and it would then not be a happy situation. So there's detail on that in the knowledge base if you want to explore that further. But basically, that's why some things may not be added, because they've come through the Mailchimp API to start with. What happens in Donorfy when someone unsubscribes in Mailchimp? We block the purposes that are mapped. Any mapped tags are removed. And we don't block email. We don't set email to red. Why is that? Because the user or the constituent might still be open to emails for things like admin, but obviously they've unsubscribed. So that's why we remove the purposes in the first place. And lastly, a couple more on this page. Should we have separate lists? Already discussed this one. No, don't use separate lists or audiences, as they're now called. Use groups instead. And then lastly, the one that I think comes up quite often is what happens when the same person subscribes with different email addresses. So the situation is someone's got a work email address, they've got a home email address. How should they subscribe to Mailchimp? Well, Mailchimp, of course, will see them as two different people with two different sets of tags, two different sets of purposes, or groups rather, because it doesn't really care that they are different people, it's two different email addresses. So that is mirrored in Donorfy. Now that might seem a bit harsh because you know they're the same person and you want to sort of have your Donorfy nice and tidy and only have one contact in there with separate email addresses within that contact. But actually, the way the world works outside of Donorfy is that most online services use email as the unique identifier. So you're going to get two records. Whether you're a Just Giving user with two different email addresses, you'll have two records. Whether you use Facebook or even something like Amazon, you're seen as two different individuals with two different sets of preferences and GDPR compliance that those services have to comply with, which means that we need to mirror that in Donorfy. So how can you minimize the impacts of that? Well, you can create connections between people to say that they are actually the same person. So if you wanted to identify that even though they're two separate constituents in Donorfy but the same person, use a connection with connection type of same person or something like that, which would indicate that they are the same. So that's us. Thank you very much for listening. These slides are available at Donorfy chat on Facebook. Go to the support site for the Mailchimp section, covers all of the integration and the FAQs. And of course, Mailchimp have all of their own tutorials and what have you as well. So appreciate your time today. Any questions, submit them as tickets on support and we'll be happy to help.